Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sunshine Coast Regional District Planning and Community Development Committee meeting for Thursday, November 18th, 2021. It's currently 9:51, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. We were a little late getting started this morning due to a EOC meeting and some technical issues, so we're going to dive right into our agenda here today. I would like to acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is located on the territory of the Sechelt and Squamish Nations. So before we adopt our agenda today, directors, are there any changes or additions or deletions to be made? If not, I look for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Before we move into our presentations and delegations, can I have a motion to receive all reports, minutes, and correspondence, please? Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Great, thank you very much. So, moving on to item number 2, we have Steve Kazuki from the Forest Enhancement Society of BC and Dan Buffett, the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, regarding conservation projects and educating the public about BC's natural assets. So we will promote them and turn the meeting over to them.
Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Just take a second while Dan and I kind of get reconnected with video and audio. Thank you so much for having us. We're really pleased to be able to share the awareness of the good work that's happening around British Columbia and to some extent right in your own district. So are you on now, Dan?
I am, sorry. Thank you very much, Steve. And just wanted to check that my screen share, everybody can see our...
Yeah, looks good, Dan, perfect. Loud and clear. And is that a falcon or an osprey?
Well, we've got a red... why have I just lost the name now? You confused me already, Steve.
Oh, sorry about that,
Dan. What we'll start with today, as Steve mentioned, is a presentation from both Steve and I organizations. While both of us are working within the regional district to advance the enhancement of fish, wildlife, and the forest habitat within the regional district. So we wanted to thank all of you today for giving us the chance to talk about the presentation, and I'll just kick things off. My name's Dan Buffett. I'm the CEO here at the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, and our organization funds conservation projects and provides education about BC's freshwater fish and wildlife in the province of BC. And one of our key partners, as Steve introduced himself, is the Forest Enhancement Society for the work they do in the forest. And I'll hand it over to Steve for his introduction.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Kazuki with the Forest Enhancement Society of BC. We're a Crown agency created by the province of British Columbia with a mandate to, I guess to put it simplistically, to go out and enable others to do good work in the forest. And on the wildlife file, we thought it made a whole ton of sense to partner up with the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation on wildlife enhancement projects, because they've been at it for a long time. They have a tremendous amount of expertise, not only with the biologists and the scientists that they have on staff, but also in terms of administrating a comprehensive program around British Columbia to enhance wildlife habitat. So that's why we partnered up with them. Thanks, Dan.
And continuing on that, one of those partnership between both our organizations began in 2016, where FESBC have really stepped up and they've committed over $5.8 million to our organization for joint projects in that improve the habitat for wildlife in the forest habitat area. So, a couple of these projects include the restoration and management of Roosevelt elk. So within the regional district and on both and on Vancouver Island. There's a couple projects going on relating to translocating some of the Roosevelt elk into some areas that have low population levels now, as well as a number of studies that are looking at how do we better manage the Roosevelt elk throughout a number of the regional districts here along the Sunshine Coast, Vancouver Island, etc. And as well a bats program that's simply called Got Bats. And it's about working with community members to understand the value, the habitat of bats, and how landowners can improve the bat habitat in their area. And so together, as Steve had mentioned, it's really about both our organizations using the strengths of both our organizations, the fiscal resources, the expertise, and the connections. And as Steve mentioned, it's taking this money and putting it into the hands of the leaders in your community that are undertaking these projects for fish and wildlife. So HCTF as an organization, we're a nonprofit charitable organization. We were founded in 1981 by hunters, anglers, and trappers and guide outfitters who at that time were paying license, but they say we were willing to pay an additional surcharge on top of that to go to HCTF to pay for beyond core government services for fish and wildlife. So that's how the program began over 40 years ago. And as part of our evolution, we've been working with a number of partners such as FESBC to expand that income beyond just that original surcharge to be able to deliver projects. And so now, since 1981, we've invested nearly $195 million in grants for over 3,000 projects throughout BC. And so the graphic on the bottom right there, it's just a project location of the projects this year that were approved for fish and wildlife throughout BC. This year, HCTF overall was a record year for us in terms of the amount of money that we approved, which was over $9.3 million for projects throughout BC. And when you break that down into the area that covers this regional district and the Lower Mainland, that means an investment of over $600,000 in 22 projects. And a couple projects that do occur in this regional district is a number of projects to do with goshawk and marbled murrelet. Pictures you see here on the screen, looking especially up in the mountainous area of the regional district, looking at where these species are nesting and how to better manage these species, which are both considered at significant risk and loss of population. There's a number of other projects that we continue to fund in terms of monitoring for invasive mussels in lakes within and around the regional district here. And HCTF also has an in-house education program that works and funds facilitators to work with teachers in the K-12 program on linking and connecting kids with nature, providing some grants for students to be able to get out into nature as well too. And this program was heavily used during COVID, or still in COVID, when a lot of families and schools really needed these type of information and resources to learn more about nature. And with that, I will hand it over to Steve to talk about FESBC.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Just a quick highlight of some of the things that FEST does. We have 269 projects all across British Columbia, and significantly, 60 of those projects are led by Indigenous people. And that's really important because they're often close to the land. They have a deep connection to the land, and therefore they have a lot to contribute. And one of the things we've learned is what they're bringing to the table is often a different multi-generational perspective and a more, I guess, stronger acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of everything in the forest. And so that's really helping all of us in the forest sector. Our biggest program is trying to help BC and Canada meet our international climate change targets. And therefore, 150 out of the $235 million of funding that we've deployed is around projects that deliver carbon benefits. And in accordance with international carbon accounting standards, there's three ways that forestry can help. First of all, planting trees, particularly after significant natural disturbances like mountain pine beetle epidemics and the wildfires. So when those trees are growing, they're absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Secondly, we can fertilize trees. If they grow faster, they can absorb carbon from the atmosphere faster and remove those carbon or greenhouse gases. And then thirdly, we can avoid emissions from slash burning. Quite often after activities, there's leftover waste wood that has to be burned for safety reasons. And if we can use that wood to create bioenergy or to create cardboard boxes or personal hygiene items from pulp, if we can avoid those emissions, and then that's an avoided emission. So in total, and we're very proud of this, all of the work that we've done so far is equivalent to taking over 1 million cars off the road for a year. And so that just shows that forestry not only can be a very important lever in the commitment to take action on climate change, but in Canada is absolutely essential. If we're going to have any hope of meeting our targets, forestry has to be part of the solution. In addition to that, we've helped 120 communities all around British Columbia reduce their wildfire risk, protecting their communities, their communication towers, their safe places in the event of an evacuation, and so on. And that's very important in many areas, drier areas of British Columbia. And of course, in doing that, many jobs were created, particularly in rural areas and forest-dependent areas. So thanks, Dan. Next slide. So just so you're aware, we don't have any projects in your regional district. And that's one of the reasons why I'm happy to be talking to you today, to encourage you. I'm sure you're very well connected, each of you directors, and you will know experts in your communities who know what needs to be done and what good projects there are out there. And we'd be delighted to hear from them, because we are, like the HCTF, we're a proponent-driven funding model. In other words, we rely on people, local people, to step up and suggest ideas for projects. And there's a good reason for that, as you can imagine. Your people that live and work in your areas, they're the experts, and so they should be the ones to decide what should be done. And so I would encourage you to get the word out and get them in contact with us. But here's a list of some of the projects that we do have on the island and the coast, just to give you some ideas. And go to our website and you'll find all kinds of amazing examples of innovative and creative solutions to help improve the condition of the forest for the benefit of people and wildlife and climate. Thanks, Dan.
Great, and thank you, Steve, and folks, and that's it. It was just today, just to let you know how both of our organizations are working and investing in and around the region, and putting the money into those experts that are improving the habitat for fish, wildlife, and forests. So, with that, if there is time for questions, we're happy to take that. But other than that, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Just before I look to directors for questions, can I get you to stop your screen share, please?
I am trying to find, where's my, sorry, I had trouble finding the button. Thank you for the reminder.
Yep. Directors, any questions for our delegation? Director Seegers.
Thank you. So, Director Toth and I actually are liaisons for the District of Sechelt to the Sunshine Coast Community Forest. And I also took part, as I think some of the other directors did, in the provincial forest change, whatever. They're looking at changing the forest regulations, right? So we took part in that. And one of the things that came up in that session was improving residual waste through fiber utilization. I don't believe we have facilities on the Sunshine Coast that would allow our community forest to take advantage of that, but I'd love to have you guys connect to see what can be done around that. Because currently, as you mentioned, the only thing they can do is burn the extra waste as they see it, and that causes air quality, issues. So I'd like to see that piece dealt with. And then we received a grant at the regional district to look at the urban interface and dealing with wildfire, fire smarting, all of those kinds of things. So I don't know if there would be any kind of connection we could make there, but that would be something else that I think we could look at. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just give you a few examples and perhaps just to show you what is possible with our funding. We are helping get waste wood from the West Chilcotin, go down the hill to Bella Coola, and down to the coastal pulp mills. Similarly, from Hazelton and Kitwanga down to Stewart or Prince Rupert or Kitimat, wherever the case may be. And then the fiber gets down to coastal pulp mills from there. So if we can do it from there, I have to think that it should be possible to do from the Sunshine Coast to get it to the market and avoid those emissions.
We'll put you in touch and see what we can make happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other questions from directors? I don't. Director Hiltz, go ahead.
Thanks very much. Yeah, the awareness is great. I'm wondering about the marine environment. So forest is mostly on the land. The water goes into the ocean. So is there projects that you deal with the marine environment? Particularly I was looking at the invasive mussels. Those are freshwater opposed to marine. So I'm wondering about the intersection with the marine environment. Thanks.
Yes, so we work a number in typically the estuaries and that interface of rivers and the estuaries. So we have a number of projects there. As you get into the marine environment, we've been less operating and more relying on, say, the Pacific Salmon Foundation, who then they have more of a jurisdiction in that area along with their funding that they get. But we've talked a little bit more about programs collective in that area, but we sort of left sort of the Pacific Salmon Foundation in the province working in the marine, and then collectively we've been working all in the estuary area in that interface as well too, and then HCTF has been focused more in the freshwater side. So that's how we've divided, but you are bang on, a lot of my past work was in that marine area, so we keep an eye on it, but we haven't been actively involved in funding projects in the marine. But you're right, they all flow together, so you have to have that coordination.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other hands up, so thank you for your presentation today. You're welcome to stick around for the remainder of the meeting if you really want to, but otherwise, have a good day and thank you for your presentation.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
All right. Moving on in our agenda, Annex A, pages 1 through 9. We've got Roberts Creek Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 641.13 2021 for 1220 Lockyer Road, consideration of first reading. So we'll turn this over to Julie Clark, Senior Planner, or Planner 1. We'll turn this over to our planning staff.
Good morning. SCRD received this application to amend Roberts Creek OCP to designate a temporary use permit area for 1220 Lockyer Road. The broader goal of this application is to facilitate a temporary use permit application for 5 RVs for longer term temporary camp spots for travel trailers, as stated by the applicant. This application is an effort by the applicant to legalize a current non-conforming land use. At this time, the decision to be made is whether by considering first reading this OCP amendment to apply the designation of temporary use permit area to the subject property. The decision of whether or not to approve a TUP, a temporary use permit for the intended use, is a separate future determination the board will have to make if the OCP amendment moves forward. As the two decisions are linked, you'll notice this report discusses some general considerations associated with the TUP as well. Staff recommend abandoning this bylaw. The proposed amendment introduces a precedent leap in land use change for this neighborhood from country residential to something that is more like mini campground or RV park. I also understand that the applicant is in the room today, the authorized agent, Mr. Ken Carson, and the property owner, Mr. Jordan Laxton, are there with you at Field Road to observe committee's discussion and are also available for questions.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Clark. As you noted, we do have Ken Carson and Jordan Laxton here in the room with us. If you'd like to take a moment to say any words before I turn to directors, I invite you to come up to the microphone and use the microphone so that those online can hear you.
I'll stand, if that's okay.
Sure.
Some of you know me. My name is Ken Carson. I'm a legal advocate. I'm employed by the Sunshine Coast Resource Center, and I am funded by the Law Foundation of BC to provide a voice for people who don't have a voice in the judicial processes and the legislative processes. I'm here today as the official agent of Jordan Laxton, but I also represent the tenants. And this, although I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk today and also appreciate the work that the planners did, there are some missing components of the backstory of this that I need to talk to you about. And again, the people I represent would be 8 tenants on this particular property, all of whom are feeling very insecure today because they don't know what's going to happen for their tenancies in the future. Will they have a home? Will they have a place to live or move to? They really don't know. So this is a very important consideration going forward, looking at the legislation, looking at the OCP, but also looking at the people who are impacted. I came into this process about, a little over a year ago now. One of my clients, her name, and she's given me permission to use her name, was named Kayla. She's a single mom of a 6-year-old. She was evicted from a rather notorious trailer park in Gibsons. And I was involved very much at that time with the town of Gibsons to try to negotiate a possible amendment to that particular bylaw that resulted in the landlord wanting to evict them. Kayla did win her case in terms of the residential tenancy branch, and it was confirmed that she did have a tenancy under the Mobile Home Park Tenancy Act. But it was such a toxic environment that Kayla was living in, she decided to move. And where did she move to? She moved to Jordan Laxton's trailer park. And that happened about September of 2020. A few months later, Jordan was forced, he felt he was forced to evict Kayla and her 6-year-old son because a bylaw officer had sent him a letter as a consequence of a complaint that he was in zoning non-compliance and he had to shut down the park. I talked to the SCRD at that time and we agreed that we would try to amend the community plan and apply for a temporary use permit so that Kayla and the other 6 people living there could continue to live there. So that's the backstory of how I came to be involved in this. And you should understand about just a little more about Kayla because she's the human face here that I want you to recognize. She's an apprentice gas fitter. She's going into her 3rd year of apprentice. I think she has another couple of years left before she's a journeyman. She is a single mom. So what she could afford was where she's living with her trailer on Jordan's land. Now, if Kayla has to leave, she will be one of the many working people, professionals and working class people who are going to have to relocate to another part of the province because they can't afford to live here. And once again, we will lose people who we need on the coast for obvious reasons, and unless we try to find a method to deal with the affordable housing crisis on the coast. I deal with this every day, so I can tell you there's a lot of misery out there. So, in terms of this particular project, I realize that the planning department wants you to put the kibosh on it right away. I would like you to consider that very seriously, the consequences that would happen. And there are some that I cannot even foresee. But I do appreciate the planning department recognizing that there are other interests in this. On page 6 of the annex, forgive me, I need to put my glasses on. Page 6 of the annex says that there are policy issues related to the Mobile Home Park Tenancy Act, and there is an obvious conflict between the bylaws, the statute that governs the planning department recommendation, and the OCP, and the Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act. And I'll quote, "Where RVs are being used for long-term stays, questions about tenancy rights are being raised in community and legal discussion. This is relevant in the case of local government land use decision-making because it appears there is a discrepancy between two guiding statutes." That is accurate. The BC Building Code does not recognize RVs as buildings. The Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act, and it should be the Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act, does not appear to rule out RVs as dwellings. That is somewhat incorrect because there was a Supreme Court decision from the Sunshine Coast, McDonald versus Creekside Campground, BC Supreme Court, 2020, that stated that manufactured or RVs are covered under the Mobile Home Park Tenancy Act. It's a Supreme Court decision. All arbitrators with the residential tenancy branch must follow that decision. So we clearly have a conflict between the two statutes. I realize I've probably taken up more than my time, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Thank you very much for your time with us today. I do see a hand up. Director McMahon?
Sure. I'd love to dive deeper into this on another occasion because there's a lot of questions right now around RVs and tiny homes and manufactured homes and so forth. But what is defined as a mobile home park? There are some mobile home parks in my area that are zoned mobile home parks. So what makes it a mobile home park?
The zoning, according to the Mobile Home Park Tenancy Act and the policy guidelines that guide its interpretation, a mobile home park, there are certain legal tests that must be applied to whether or not something is a campground or a mobile home park. The tests have to do with things like permanency of the dwelling, not the fact that it's an RV or a mobile home as we traditionally think of one. So it has to do with the permanency of the tenancy, how long it's been there, whether or not the person uses it as a recreational vehicle or living accommodation, whether the person has determined or made changes to the site, like perhaps put a deck in there or a workshop or something. So there's all sorts of legal tests that determine whether somebody is a tenant in a mobile home park or somebody who is camping. And the decisions tend to be predominantly coming down these days are that permanent accommodation in something like the Creekside Campground, which is obviously a campground, is indeed a tenancy under the Mobile Home Park Tenancy Act, and the dwelling is a manufactured home. And that's the key, the manufactured home. It's not a mobile home, it's a manufactured home. And it can have wheels, it can be dragged away, and it may not be. And that's what the statute says. And I believe that's in the annex too.
So as a follow-up, the RV park at the top of Gilmore Road, which under our zoning is a campground and advertises itself as an RV park, is also considered a mobile home park?
I don't know about that particular one. I will tell you that the one in Madeira Park, I had a mass eviction there last winter, 11 people. It was confirmed it was a mobile home park. Under the Mobile Home Park Tenancy Act, they had tenancies. I know that some of the directors here are aware of that particular property. There was one in Gibson's, which I alluded to before, which I believe Director Kroll is aware of. We had two decisions out of that particular mobile home park. One confirmed a mobile home park tenancy exists, the other did not. However, that was before the BC Supreme Court decision came down in December of 2020. So, yes.
So under our zoning, campground is for people who are staying not longer than 30 days. But that gets trumped by the provincial decision? Is that?
That is my interpretation. You would get other people who would say, oh no, that's not right, we got to challenge this again. But that is my interpretation, and that is what I advise my clients. And so a case by case, arbitrations go forward on the basis of that.
Thank you very much. Director Ties.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm, I guess, concerned about the health and safety, wondering whether the septic field that's been installed there is able to handle the volume and is permitted to the right volumes there.
It's a very good question. I'm going to defer to Jordan Laxton for that technical question because I'm more aware of the legislative things rather than the technical.
How are you today, everybody? Thank you for letting us speak. May I take my mask off for here? This is right here. Is this okay or no?
Sorry, you gotta keep it on.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Septic. The Steve Warren, who does all the septic tanks, or used to do all the septic tanks on the Sunshine Coast, was. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Came in. Did the previous septic tanks on the property, and it also planned out that septic tank in particular for that many size. So that gentleman, that was his life's work on the Sunshine Coast, and that's who planned that out. Okay, for that many people. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I have a few things to say. It's just a shame some of the terminology we end up using. When you talk about a trailer park, for instance, the negative connotations that come with it are obvious. But from when we got started on the project in the first place, it was not our intention to make a trailer park or even have pads on the estate. We were simply filling in an area of the property that was along the Sunshine Coast corridor, but the edge of my property, that was a lower hole that was mainly a garbage dump for people on the side of the highway that had an invasive plant problem. So we wanted to clear that up, and the intention was just to make a nice bank and make a berm that would clean up the area. One of the reasons I bring that up is because if we can refer to the Annex and the OCP 4 points that are brought up on it, to encourage and reinforce country residential, non-commercial, non-industrial character along the Sunshine Coast Highway. We have done nothing but enhance that. We have taken down some hazardous hemlock trees. As some of you know, hemlock trees hollow out and become a hazard to anyone within 100 feet of those. We've replaced it with a bank that allows, if you look to point 3, to maintain visual corridor along the Sunshine Coast with natural screening and vegetation. So we've put a hedge on the top of that, which is all the redwood cedars. And on the front of that bank, we've put blue spruce and hydrangeas. Again, I bring it up because some of the the second point of the OCP to follow the community plan is to maintain larger lots with low density development consistent with rural acreage's atmosphere. We've not changed the atmosphere of this property. It does have that rural country acreage feel to it. I've actually brought pictures along with me today to show you, because it's unfortunate in the annexed, it only shows you an animated drawing of a triangle from a top view, and you have to use your imaginations to understand what it looks like. If I change the words trailer park to an estate with pads on it, a few pads on it, does that change the connotations to what you're talking? I mean, we're talking.
I'm going to cut you off,
Okay,
just
sir.
because we're just dealing with the temporary use permit issue today.
Okay.
And I do have quite a speakers list here.
Sure,
so
sure, yeah, absolutely.
You're welcome to stay in that seat if there are other questions for you. I'm going to move on to Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. I don't get to vote on this, but I was very much involved in the incident that Mr. Carson referred to in Gibson's. And with people who need accommodation that's affordable, what has ended up costing the town of Gibson's is a horrendous amount of money because the TUP for this particular park was turned down. It was actually, the TUP was approved, but the property owner couldn't make a business case out of the conditions that council applied to the TUP that made it prohibitive for him to carry on with it. It's been a huge impact on the community, it's been an impact on staff, and it's been a cost to the taxpayers with these people being displaced in the middle of a housing crisis. So, my personal feeling, for what it's worth, is that sometimes people need to be put before rules. And with the housing crisis such as it is, I know people who probably would be desperate to get into your facility for accommodation. We have them parked on the streets of Gibson's right now.
I literally have 6 people on a wait list, and I have a person once a month show up at my front door to ask me if they can come onto the property.
Thank you, Director Kroll. Director Seegers, you're next.
Thank you. This is actually a question for Ken. So what I heard in what you said is, if something is designated as a campground, but the operators don't follow the 30-day rule, so somebody can come in an RV, they don't leave within 30 days, then that automatically becomes a manufactured home park?
That is not, sorry, microphone. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
It would have to be determined by an arbitrator and a court whether that particular scenario would be. However, I would certainly push the outside of the envelope. Now, would something automatically become, that was your really question? I cannot say, but I can say that people who have moved into a campground, like Creekside, and who've lived there for 3 years, it's been determined that that is a permanent residency, and the RV, so-called, is now a manufactured home under the Mobile Home Park Tenancy Act. So that is the, the scenario that you're talking about is simply a scenario. We don't have, there's not specific time frames. It's whether or not it's a tenancy. And yes, you can have a 30-day tenancy. It exists. So, I mean, that has yet to be, those particular details in terms of how this is interpreted. The legislation is silent on it, but the court precedent in this particular thing looks at the tests that I mentioned before. Not necessarily the length. The length of the tenancy is something, or the length of the stay is germane. But whether 30 days, I can't say, but certainly 3 years is a strong case. Or in Jordan's case, what is the longest?
Well, we're actually not applying for
I know.
short term like that, so that doesn't apply to us of what we're asking for.
No, but what would happen, and this is a scenario too, Director Seegers, if this is turned down, and if the SCRD says you're in violation, close it down, I would represent the tenants in an action against Mr. Laxton. Let's say a scenario, it's confirmed as a mobile home tenancy. Then he is then in conflict with both the residential tenancy branch and the SCRD. He's going to get squeezed by both. And that's a financial concern of his, and I appreciate that. It's a home concern for my tenants, and I am committed to that. So this is why it's really important that the SCRD show leadership as in trying to find a method to prevent these sorts of legal, eviction processes that cause enormous amount of stress on tenants and in landlords, that there has to be an alternative form of housing, even if it's temporary, to wait for some of these larger projects that are always being talked about down the road, but when we have the crisis is now. So, I'm sorry.
On your page 5 of your Amex, it says that it's pointed out that the planning department has plans in the future to accommodate for these housings. What we're applying for is a temporary use permit. I am not changing the land. I am not changing it to a permanent past what the issue is for years in advance. It won't be a permanent campground forever. We would like to keep the zoning as it is. This is a temporary setup as it's issued for 3 years. In 3 years, I would think that the planning department's plans might come to fruition, but it's not going to happen now. I mean, you have people, besides the 6 people on my list, I have people approaching me of how they can hide their projects in the woods to hide campers. And I'm not advising anybody to do anything, but it's amazing how many people are approaching me in the community.
It's also very well known, all of us know this, there are bylaw contraventions throughout the Sunshine Coast. I personally know of 2 where small homes and RVs up to 10 live on a 5-acre property. No complaints, no issues. It's only when the complaint opens the door, but the door has been open for years.
And I'm going to cut you off there because we got a lot of speakers to get through, and we got to stay on target here. So, Director Seegers, did you have a follow-up to that? Okay. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I just had a question for staff. I seem to remember when we were discussing temporary use permits as a possible solution for STRs, that there is a limit to renewals on TUPs. Is that the case?
Thank you for the question. The Local Government Act specifies that the first temporary use permit may be authorized for up to 3 years or less if the local government designates it as such, and it is renewable once.
For another period of up to 3 years.
Correct.
Okay, so up to 6 years total if the local government permits.
Yes.
All right, Director Ties.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is ultimately, the recommendation that this be abandoned is that staff is of the opinion that it's a complicated thing, as Ken has pointed out. But I guess ultimately I'm asking, what does staff envision happening if we actually go forward with allowing this temporary use permit, considering that there is a conflict in BC statute, and what would be the next steps in that direction?
Good question. Who would like to take that, Ms. Clark or GM Hall? GM Hall?
Thank you, Chair. So from a process point of view, if first reading is given, staff would work with the applicant to have the applicant conduct a public information meeting. We'd bring a report back with a recommendation regarding second reading, and that would lead to a public hearing. And it's, as I believe is noted in the report, it's possible that information from the public information meeting could be used to inform potential conditions on a future temporary use permit. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question might have been answered, but I'll do it anyways just to see where we are. My concern was safety and appropriate utilities and paying fair share for the resources used. I was wondering, is your setup as a normal manufactured home, or whatever you want to call it? Anyways, it's a permanent home. Do you have the amenities to provide that on the property?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because the houses on the property, a 2-bedroom house and a 3-bedroom house, would seat 10 adults. Over the last 10 years, we've had 4 adults living there, in using only, as it was approved for, to hold 10 people. With those trailers, with the amount of trailers and people that are on there, we still meet that capacity. We don't go over that capacity. For instance, the garbage that gets picked up, the solid waste, we've never exceeded the 2 garbage cans that we're supposed to have, because there's the right amount of people on that property. The water amount is for 10 people living in those 2 houses, but there isn't 10 people. So we're talking about the difference of 1 or 2 people. We're not talking 20 trailers here. We're only, there's 4 now, and I had put in for 5, but maybe 4 is the right number.
All right, thank you. Director Lee, did you have a follow-up? Are you good?
No, I believe I'm good. I think the answer was that Vancouver Health has no problem with the septic system, and Hydro has no problem with the safety.
Hydro has no problem. BC Hydro was pulled in to have a separate a line put in just for those at my expense by BC Hydro.
Thank you. Okay, Director Kroll.
Thank you. Something that Mr. Carson alluded to, which I think is really important, is that, and it's a squeeze play the property owner gets into, is anyone who has a property and invites an RV to park on it, the intent under the Landlord-Tenant Act is that property owner is becoming a landlord. And under the pure intent of the act, the resident of the RV or manufactured home on that property is protected under the Landlord-Tenant Act. And it really does complicate things when you get laws conflicting with people's lives. And it's a situation we ran into in Gibson's, and why Mr. Carson ended up with the 2 cases. The interesting thing, both the cases were the same, but it was different arbitrators who had different rulings on them. But I spent about 2 hours on the phone with residential tenancy with that incident. And under the pure intent of the act, whether you have permission, it's a legal park or an illegal park, or you just tell someone, hey, you can park in my driveway, you're now a landlord. And so it gets very complicated when rules and regulations come in conflict with individuals' lives.
Thank you, Director Kroll. Director Pratt.
Thank you. So my concerns, I do have the same safety concerns and making sure the utilities are all being allocated and being compensated for fairly. When I look at an OCP amendment and look at that and fitting in the character, because I have, of course, heard the concerns from some of the other property owners in the area. Yet when I look at it as a whole, to me, this seems like an appropriate place to look at a densification, or it, in this case, this may have not followed the process that we wanted, as of course, when we've seen this with other properties where we do get a property owner that hasn't necessarily followed the steps, but as the applicant has said, it's something that happened, and here we are now in a position where it's like, look, let's bring you into compliance. I'd be supportive of going to a first reading on this. I think it's necessary. We are in an affordable housing crisis. When you're looking at this property in particular, it's right on the bus route. It's something that it's close to the highway. It's in that area that makes sense to have it, to have more people or have more people living there. So I really, that's where I'm leaning on this is, we are in an affordable housing crisis. This may not have happened the way our processes are set up. It may have not happened the right way. However, we need to look at this. We need to look at the human impact as well as the community impact going forward. And to me, I think this, once we go through the bylaw amendment process, I think we'll find where there's some gaps and get those fixed and set up. But at the end of the day, we're going into winter or we are in winter, and to look at eviction of a number of residents, I don't think is human, and government needs to be human and humane and responsive. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pratt. Just before I go to the next speaker on my list, I'm going to weigh in on this as well, even though I don't get to vote on this. I am supportive of moving this forward to first reading as a project, as a temporary use permit. Whether in 3 years or 6 years' time, the property owner's got to revert back to the country estate and get rid of all of the manufactured homes, the trailers on the property, or whether the SCRD catches up with the actuality of what's happening in this province every day. Obviously we have no crystal ball. But in moving forward with a temporary use permit, we are recognizing that this is a short-term option for people in our community. It may not be the ideal situation. Ideally, you might want to go through a whole rezoning process on the property, but right now we need housing, and I think that this is a way forward on that. So with that, I'm going to move to my next speaker, which is Director McMahon.
Thank you. I'm fascinated by the label agritourism campground because I'm not aware of anything in my area that I would visualize as an agritourism campground. I don't think parking an RV in somebody's driveway really counts. I was just wondering, Bylaw 310 is under revision, and I'm wondering if we are looking at any changes that would address some of the confusion around these land uses. Thanks.
Thank you. GM Hall or Miss Clark? GM Hall, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The scope of the project to refresh Bylaw 310 didn't include specific work around campgrounds or mobile home parks, but certainly did include user friendliness and clarity. So just aiming to manage expectations that we were not instructed to pursue a total renewal of the policy framework there, yet staff are optimistic that the draft, when brought forward in the coming months, will prove easier for users to understand. Thank you.
There are a lot of issues in my area around what is an RV park and what is a campground, where property owners can put in a fairly substantial RV park on essentially a rural residential property, and neighbors don't get consulted about it and are pretty upset. So we need a way to have a proper public process around this, and I'm not sure what the next steps are, but I have all kinds of unconforming properties right now, and while they may be perfectly nice, well-run facilities, for somebody who is renting out, say, 65 pads on a commercial basis to be paying residential property taxes is a problem from my standpoint. So we kind of need to regularize some of these situations, and it would benefit everybody to have some reasonable rules and certainty around it. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess as part of that temporary use permit, is there a way to move to commercial water rates and commercial property taxes? Because it is essentially a business that is being run here. So just wondering if that is an option.
Little bit outside the scope of today's request, but I saw GM Hall reaching for the microphone, so I'll let him go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I'll draw us back to process and say that one of the process steps that we always follow with OCP amendments are referrals, and that would include internal referrals, and we would look to identify policy and financial implications for the organization. And so you could expect information about things like utilities as part of future steps should this application proceed. Thanks.
Can I just say something? There's two things, if you don't mind.
Real quick, sure.
Yeah, one, neighbors has been brought up a couple times. If you look carefully at the property, there's three properties that line the back end of the property. Otherwise, there's no neighbors on the front because it's the highway, and there's no neighbors from Lockyer. The only neighbor that we have is a horse and a goat. There's a stable that is close to the property, but it's 14 feet away. And from there, you can't see anything. So when you talk about neighbors complaining and so on, it's, you are talking about people that are far enough away from the property that it doesn't visually affect them.
Thank you. Director Seegers.
Thank you. This will be a question for Ken. If we were to allow a temporary use permit on this site, it basically legitimizes it for a period of time. What's the legality around then evicting residents from a property when that temporary use permit expires?
It would be the same as if it was tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry. If an eviction took place, it would be no different. The Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act and the interpretation, the policy guidelines that I've read around this take no note of zoning. And I didn't create those policies. I didn't create the act, but the precedents basically say that act trumps zoning. So it doesn't make any difference if the tenants are evicted tomorrow, in 3 years, or 6 years. It's still an eviction. But it doesn't mean that the property wouldn't revert to the way it was. It just means that there could be a financial disadvantage to the landlord who wants to, first of all, keep the process going, wants to keep his business going, but also maybe if the temporary use permit expires, the SCRD could conceivably fine the landlord while the eviction process goes forward. And under ideal circumstances for tenants that I would represent in the Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act, that's a 1-year notice and $20,000 compensation that the landlord would have to pay to the tenants. So that's financially onerous for the landlord. And yes, but I mean, that's what we want to avoid. And this is a stopgap measure, but it's still better than evicting somebody.
Thank you. That clarifies it.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yeah, so I want to just speak up on behalf of the community. I've had dozens of letters, including a petition sent to me from the community at large and the neighborhood around. Well over 20 people that are all in opposition of this development, and that so it's been unanimous. So it's, and there's the compassion is fairly low because the way that this process is unfolded is build first and then ask for permission later, and so the community is not in favor of that. So I'm going to have to go with staff recommendations on this, but yeah, I hear the arguments, but overall, there's a disappointment in the community for the lack of bylaw enforcement. There's a disappointment in the community for the way that this has been handled and the delay that has happened. I've fielded multiple emails every month asking for patience, or me asking for patience to get to this point right now. I cannot support a 3-year temporary use permit to keep things exactly the same as they have been right now. So that's just my job as the representative of the community, and I just wanted to speak on that.
Thank you, Director Ties. Director Seegers?
Thank you. A 3-year temporary use permit is the maximum allowed. That doesn't mean that that would be what you would have to suggest. You could suggest a 1-year or a 2-year, and then it would have to come back to be approved again. So it could potentially be a 1-year term, right? It depends on how that plays out.
And,
So it
and the
doesn't
other
have to be
thing,
3 years.
the other thing too is that temporary use permits can come with conditions. So when you look at the correspondence that's been received from the community, are they upset with the people living there? Are they upset with the property owner? Are they upset with the way this process has unfolded? Because, people can be upset with the process and upset with the property owner, but at the end of the day, we're still talking about making people homeless. So.
Yeah, so I think all of the above would be appropriate. just, so yeah, the neighbors believe that this should have been cracked down on when it was first discovered. I did, try to make the argument about affordable housing and such things, but ultimately, the neighborhood and the community at large so far has been unanimously against this development. And I just wanted to state that for the record. And as a representative of the community, I can't vote for it. So,
Thank you, Director Ties. I'm actually, sorry. First of all, your microphone's off. Second of all, at this point, it's not, there's no questions for you at this point. It's a decision at this side of the table. Yeah, I appreciate that. Unfortunately, yeah, most of us have been copied on, a lot of the correspondence that's come in. So, Director Seegers, I see your hand up. Okay, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm just going to point out that there are a lot of irregular housing situations going on in the rural areas right now. I'm aware of a number of them in my area, but they're not receiving complaints because neighbors understand that we are in a housing crisis. So I think everybody is trying to cut slack wherever we can.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I appreciate the pressure that Director Ties is under with, letters of complaint. I know what we went through in the town of Gibsons with our supportive housing. We had public hearings. It was a bit like an orchestra of scorched cats. But at the end of the day, we really had to, as a council, make the decision that these are people's lives we're dealing with, and it is a housing crisis. To a comment that Director McMahon made, and again, it's bylaw, it complains. I know of personally in the rural areas where RVs are parked in driveways and they're being rented out as short-term rentals, and they're advertised on Airbnb. So, there's a lot of problems with zoning, with bylaws, with bylaw enforcement, with compliance. But at the end of the day, there are people's lives involved, and I think weighing factor.
Thank you, Director Kroll. And it's not just in the rural areas, of course. We've got it in the municipalities too. There are several on my street that are occupied full-time. So I see a couple of hands up here. I see Director Kroll, your hand is still up, and Director McMahon has also put her hand down. I don't see any other hands, so I will look for somebody to make a motion. Director Ties.
well, I'm not sure if it's a popular motion, but I would like to follow staff's recommendations as listed on page 1, please.
Thank you. And I do have a seconder for that. Any other comments from directors before I call the question? Director Pratt.
I appreciate the pressure that Director Ties is under, and certainly know that from being under that certain pressure within my own community over certain issues as well. However, I cannot support this. I will be voting against it. I do believe that we should go to a first hearing on this bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pratt. Director Hiltz, you've been quiet.
I can be unquiet. I think it's a discussion that the community needs to have in broader context, more details, and for me, pushing for the first reading and the public information meeting is one way to do that, to bring it to the light of day. I might not necessarily be in favor of a 3-year TUP, but I'm definitely, I'm looking at the timelines, and it'll be 2022 before this kind of gets rolling, so we get through the winter, and look at the details from there. So yeah, I'm going to not be supporting the recommendation of staff.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very reluctant to have to not support the motion. I'd like to hear more I have a lot of these instances in my area where the homeowner has strictly done it for profit and hasn't put the necessary amenities in to even meet the basic needs of people. So I would like to hear from more people in the Roberts Creek area than the 20 that have chosen to comment. And when they realize that these people are at risk of being evicted with nowhere to go, if they still want to say the same thing, that's a different matter. But 20 isn't enough for me in an instance this severe. So.
Thank you, Director Lee. Director McMahon, I'll go to you real quick, and then I'll call the question here.
Yeah, I'm just going to stick up for the folks who are complaining, because we have a bylaw process, and when we can't enforce our own bylaws and then won't enforce our own bylaws, it puts us in a very, very difficult situation. As much as I look forward to the opportunity to have another public hearing in Roberts Creek.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Seegers?
Thank you. Could you just indicate the voting on this, please?
Yeah, so the voting is rural planning, A, B, D, E, and F. Director Lee, I see your hand up. Is that again or still?
No, it's again. I was thinking about what Director McMahon said. And I believe the first priority of us as a regional district, and when we're enforcing our bylaws, is to see if we can seek compliance and find a way forward rather than just jump all over them. And we do that with our building bylaws. I think we should need to do that with all of our bylaws. So that's where my head was on this. But I tend to agree with Director McMahon. We haven't been enforcing our bylaws enough. But I think if someone is willing to work with us and there is a way forward, I think it keeps with the principle of a regional district.
Thank you, Director Lee. I don't see any other hands up. We do have a motion on the floor that bylaw 641.13 be abandoned. So I am going to call the question, A, B, D, E, and F. All those in favor? Opposed? Sorry, Director Pratt, I didn't see your hand.
I'm having some connectivity issues here as well, so I'm not sure sometimes. I can hear, but the video is just wonky, so I am opposed.
You are opposed. Okay, so that's 2 in favor, 3 opposed. That motion's been defeated. Directors, I'll look for another recommendation. Director Pratt.
I would like to move that we proceed with first reading of, sorry, I'll just get the bylaw number there. First reading of 641.13, and that to proceed with first reading to be followed by public information meeting and referral to agencies.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? I do have a seconder for that. I think everybody's comments probably still stand from the first motion, so unless I see any hands jumping up and down here, I will call the question. A, B, D, E, and F. All those in favor? Okay. Opposed? Director Ties, would you like that recorded?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Okay. That has been passed. So at this point, yeah, it's back to staff. And that's it for this item on our agenda. So thank you for coming out today, fellas. You are welcome to stay and enjoy the rest of this meeting if you want. Otherwise, have a good day.
Thanks.
All right. It's 11:05. Did we want to just take a 10-minute break or 5-minute break?
Sure.
Yes? Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute recess. We'll be back at 11:15. Good morning and welcome back to the regularly scheduled Planning and Community Development Committee meeting. Moving on in our agenda, we have Annex B. Oh, my camera's not on. Thank you, Director McMahon. Let me turn my camera on so everybody can see that I'm actually still here. So moving on, we've got Annex B, Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 310.192, 2020 for 2284 Pixton Road. Consideration of amended second reading. Turn this over to Mr. Seau.
Thank you, Chair. So in response to community input received through the previous consultation and first public hearing process, the applicant has proposed to change the proposed development from a second dwelling to an auxiliary dwelling on the property in order to reduce the residential density and potential impact on the neighborhood. As such, the revised bylaw to reflect this change is proposed to be considered for amended second reading. And if the bylaw receives amended second reading, staff recommend that a second public hearing to be held to gather further community input. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Directors, questions, comments, recommendations? Director Ties?
Yes, thank you. One of the questions from the community is is it specifically an auxiliary dwelling? Because we are debating in the bylaw 310 revision that that size will be upsized, or is it limited to 55 square meters no matter what? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. An auxiliary dwelling is defined in the zoning bylaw, and it is limited to a floor area of 55 square meters in total. There were discussions about increasing the size of auxiliary dwelling through the public consultation process for the bylaw 310 update. But the bylaw has not been updated, or the new provision has not been adopted. So yes, the 55 square meters floor area limit still applies.
I think to clarify Director Ties' question, is the zoning amendment that's being proposed here going to fix for 2284 Pixton Road the size of the auxiliary dwelling at 55 square meters? Or is it just going to be auxiliary dwelling? And in the future, if that does that increase the size of the permitted auxiliary dwelling at this particular address?
Yes, if in the future the bylaw or the updated bylaw allows an increase in size, yes, then this auxiliary dwelling will be entitled for the increase.
Thank you. That clarifies it for me at least. Director Seegers?
Thank you. That resident, though, would need to come back and reapply, would he not? He couldn't just automatically increase the size. He would need to apply, go through the building process and all that kind of stuff.
I would expect just a building permit process at that point, but GM Hall?
Thank you, Chair. The amendment bylaw as drafted states an auxiliary dwelling, and so the definition of the day in the bylaw would apply.
Sorry, follow up to that. What we're wondering is, if this gets approved at 55 square meters, and the bylaw at some point in the future changes, what is the impact on this resident? What steps could they take at that point?
Thank you. So staff's understanding here is that because the amendment bylaw as included with this report on page 13 of the agenda states an auxiliary dwelling and doesn't specify a fixed floor area, that the definition of an auxiliary dwelling, which currently is stated as a maximum floor area of 55 square meters would apply. But because the area isn't referenced specifically, this bylaw amendment carried forward into some hypothetical future bylaw, if it just states an auxiliary dwelling, it would relate to the definitions in that future bylaw.
So at that point, a homeowner would only need to apply for a building permit to add a bedroom to the building or what have you, if the auxiliary building size was increased in a future bylaw revision.
We're speculating about a future bylaw, which is never easy, but if the zoning for this property states that an auxiliary dwelling is permitted, and the future size of that dwelling is 58 or 65 or 72 square meters, and a building permit is received that aligns with that definition in the zoning bylaw, then staff would process that accordingly.
Okay.
Thank you.
I
Thank you. I think that's the
recognize,
clarity, right,
yeah,
that we
it's
were looking
difficult
for,
to
yes.
speculate on what may or may not happen with future bylaw revisions. However, the comments from the community have been specifically relating to the size of the dwelling. So I think, yeah, knowing, even speculating on this side of the table about how that could unfold in the future is important conversation to have. Director Ties, I see your hand up.
Yeah, the other question is regarding the MOTI intentions. And I don't know if staff has any answers on this, but do we have a timeline on when they're planning on changing the designation and what the designation will be? And as a result, will any kind of resurfacing occur? These are just some of the clarification questions I have, but I'm clear. It's clear that that's a MOTI answer. So I don't know if staff can has any more insight than we do.
Mr. Seo?
Thank you, Chair. So I just like to clarify that staff has not received information about specific date of the changing the classification of the road. The ministry has mentioned that they will be changing it very soon, but in reality the road has been maintained by MOTI, and it is just how the road is classified. It's just an administrative function on the MOTI side. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Ties, I see your hand up. Are you going to move some recommendations for me?
Sure. Now that I have my hand up, I will move staff recommendations on page 10, and the date is not clear yet, and that was because I'm not going to be on the coast during the first proposed date, but I haven't seen a second proposed date by staff. So should we leave that blank, or should we determine a date now?
GM Hall?
Thank you, Chair. If Director Ties is available to participate electronically on the date that I believe has been discussed of January 11th, then including that in the recommendation at this time would be appropriate.
Yeah, that can be done. Yeah.
So you're moving the recommendations as presented, adding scheduled for January 11th, 2022.
That's correct.
All right. Do I have a seconder for that? I do have a seconder for that. This is electoral area D, Rural Planning Service, voting A, B, D, E, and F. I see no other hands up, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on in our agenda to Annex C, Community Emergency Preparedness Fund application for evacuation plan grants. Now, it's authored by Manager Trite, but I don't believe he's here. So, GM Hall?
Thank you, Chair. And we were going to have our emergency program coordinator, Jordan Pratt, with us to present this, but he's been deployed to the Emergency Operations Center. So in his stead and with our Manager of Protective Services away, I'm pleased to ask for the committee's support to apply to the Ubcm Community Emergency Preparedness Fund for an evacuation route planning grant, as was discussed in the last planning and development departmental quarterly report. And as noted in the report, staff are coordinating with the District of Sechelt and actually also with the town of Gibsons to pursue a regional approach on this while working with the grant guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, GM Hall. I will note that the District of Sechelt has seen the application for Tawanik and we did approve it, so that's moving forward through the process. Director McMahon.
Right, 2 questions. Are we going forward with the evacuation route planning regardless of whether the grant is accepted, or is it contingent on the grant? And the other question is, assuming that we were going forward with it, is there a point at which the board would see what this planning process is going to look like? Thank you.
GM Hall.
Thank you. As currently proposed, this project is grant contingent. So as was noted in the pre-budget package, this would only be included in the financial plan if the grant is, or the work would only proceed if the grant is approved, because at this time, there are no other resources to support this work. And the staff would be pleased to share process information relating to the project should it proceed, and of course, products would be shared with the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director McMahon, did you have a follow-up or?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, folks have lots of questions right now about emergencies, seeing as how we've had such a plentiful number of emergencies. And I think that we need to have an item on an upcoming meeting where we talk about our emergency planning and lessons learned and things that we need to do. So, but not right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee.
I do agree with Director McMahon's comments, but for this particular item, I'd like to make a motion to accept the recommendations as presented on page 15.
Thank you. And I've got multiple seconders for that. Director Hiltz, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Just let me get back. I'm referring to the page 15. Each jurisdiction gets to prepare one application. So this is the SCRDs. Sechelt has applied, and the town could apply, so you could get all 3, and the regional district will throw a loop around the whole thing and coordinate it. Is that kind of what they're looking at?
I'm going to stab a follow-up question in there. Can the SIGD also apply for one? GM Hall? Or CAO McKinley, if you know the answer?
I don't know the answer on the SIGD question. I do know that this morning we were approached by the town of Gibsons to see if there was any chance, if they were to try to put an application in, if we could work with them on running that one as well. We realized about 30 seconds into that conversation that the application deadline for the town of Gibsons is tomorrow. And as we just mentioned, the coordinator we would have if we were to try to put in a Hail Mary application at the last minute with the town of Gibsons has been deployed in the Emergency Operations Center. So we're going to look at it and see if there's anything we could do, or if that would have to be something that unfortunately for the town of Gibsons would have to wait till the next intake. So we're going to see if there's a way we can pull it off.
Hey, if I recall, this is a fairly regular granting stream that is made available to communities. So, okay. I've got no further hands up, so I will call the question. This is voting all because it's emergency planning. All those in favor of the recommendations? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex D, water lease renewal for Keats Landing, Eastbourne, and Vaucroft docks. GM Gagnon.
Yes, good morning, everyone. The report in front of you today is to authorize staff to submit applications to renew our water leases for the Keats Landing, Eastbourne, and Vocoft docks. If the board has any questions related to the report, I'm happy to do my best to answer them.
Thank you for that. Directors, any questions? Director McMahon.
Yes, I note the comment in the report that the province likes longer than 5-year leases, but I also am aware that we really need to review all of our docks and ports. So is the thought to renew these at a relatively short length until we pull everything together in one amazing master ports plan?
Thank you for the question. Yes, there are a number of options for the length of the term that you can request. And staff is recommending that we continue with our current practice of a 5-year renewal. There are many changes and uncertainties related to water leases, foundation agreement, rights and titles, federal environmental regulations. So this shorter lease also provides us with the nimbleness to be able to respond. And of course, these are just applications for renewals, and it may be some time before we hear back. And we even know what conditions are going to be applied to the application. So to be consistent, we are requesting a 5-year renewal lease period. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I'm supportive of the recommendations, and we'll move that. I did have a question of the GM in terms of the capacity. It's close, but not right on the report. But their ability of staff, what is the staffing level of ports to kind of do this work, and whether they can comment on that or not?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So in terms of the lease renewals and the applications, that is an administrative function. And so we certainly have the capacity to do that, and we're almost ready to go. We just need the board resolution to attach to the applications themselves. In terms of the overall capacity in ports, I don't want to jinx anything yet, but I am very pleased to say that progress is being made on our recruitment efforts for a dedicated resource for ports to help us continue to move forward with other priorities and the ongoing service level maintenance. So in the meantime, we certainly have put together a small but mighty team of resources that are sort of overseeing. We've sort of piecemealed it out in terms of different pieces being overseen, and the team meets on a regular basis to ensure that we are continuing to maintain and do our regular inspections and such. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And while the question was being asked, I heard you say, Director Hiltz, that you were moving those recommendations, and Director McMahon seconded them for you. So that is on the floor now. I don't see any other hands up, so I will call the question. This is Ports Service, so voting B, D, E, and F. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex E, Assignment of Street Lighting Inventory. Ms. Gagnon, I think this is back to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity that's been provided to me to learn a little bit more about street lighting here with the SCRD. And I do want to start by apologizing for the error in my report in which I reference an Annex B that does not exist. So the only thing missing there wasn't a light, it was my editing error from a leftover draft report. So I do apologize. But as the report suggests, the SCRD has been contacted by BC Hydro to consider adding 18 streetlights that currently exist to its inventory. To be clear again, the 18 streetlights exist and have been there for many years. The exact number of years is not known. How they originated, I can't attest to, but they're there. And it is while BC Hydro was working through its inventory of lighting to convert to LED lights, which are dark sky compatible, they've discovered that these particular lights were unaccounted for and subsequent billing was not aligned. So the SCRD does have a regional street lighting service. Light encompassed in our current inventory of regional street lights are deemed to be making a public or a contribution to public safety and are located along major roads at intersections or in places of public use like parks or bus stops. 16 of these 18 lights meet that criteria and therefore could be added to this service. The SCRD also has several separate community-specific street lighting services. 2 of the 18 lights are located within the Fircrest Road street lighting service area by bylaw, and therefore could fall under this service as well. So given that these lights exist and could fall and meet criteria of our 2 various street lighting bylaws, administration is recommending that we bring forward a budget proposal in round 1 to include these lights in our current inventory under the appropriate street lighting service. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a whole host of questions, but I'm not going to ask them at this meeting. I'll send them in an email because they're not really pertinent to the decision here today. Director McMahon, I see your hand up.
Yes, I started asking questions about where some of these street lightings came from, and who put them in, who requested them, how do you get rid of them if you don't want it anymore? It's a great rabbit hole, and I could happily dive down it for quite some time. But given the relatively modest amount of money involved and the fact that we've got a whole lot of other things to do right now, including actual emergencies, I think I will go ahead and move the recommendations on page 19, although I would welcome an opportunity at some future date to talk about how the heck we got into the regional street lighting business. And yeah, I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Director McMahon. I do see a seconder for that. Thank you, Director Lee. Director Hiltz, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, there shall be no orphan lights is how I read the report. But I did look at the costs as Director McMahon was talking about, and it drew my attention to the financial plan that we have and the limits by law of the taxation limits. And this one caught my eye because it's we can tax up to $2 million for the street lighting function based on the bylaw that's there, and we spend about 40. So a 50 times ratio seemed a little out of line. So I just, this was, is this true that that's the amount? That was the question. It was just whether it was an error. So I think staff might be prepared. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'll start with an answer and I'll defer. I'm not sure if our CFO or our corporate services officer are in the room, but part of my research into streetlights was reading these compelling and interesting bylaws. And I will suggest that the regional street lighting, which is the one you're referring to, is an order in council that originates back to 1971. And in 1971, the approved mill rate at that point in time was 25 cents for every $1,000. So it seems to be correct. Why it was set at that rate, I obviously, I was alive in 1971. However, I cannot attest to why, but I'm happy to turn it over to our corporate officer if she has an answer to that, or perhaps that is enough of an answer. Thank you.
Director Hiltz, are you happy with that answer, or would you like more? We can go all day on this one. Millions of dollars in street lighting.
The reason it drew my attention is because the situation that Egmont Fire Hall found themselves into, that this limit was kind of lingering and was not really addressed. So that was my, is it accurate? Because it just, the public looks at this and going, well, you can expand your streetlights a whole bunch. So it's just, these things that drag on from previous years, we never quite get around to it. So, it just caught my eye. So it'll catch my eye again, but I'm good with it right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Hiltz. Director Ties.
Yeah, seconding Director McMahon's notion that maybe we need to talk about this in the future. My question is, how does MOTI fit into all this? Because we're lighting their roads, and do we need permission for them to install this infrastructure? Do they give us some funding to make their roads safer? So those are some of the questions I've got regarding street lighting. But I think a future date might be a good discussion to be had, so not right now.
Thank you, Director Ties. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'll second that. Like, why are we lighting Highway 101? and who decided, and on what basis did they decide to put lights where they did? Yeah, we could have a fulsome discussion, as people like to say.
Fulsome indeed. Thank you very much for that, directors. Would somebody like to make a motion here? Director Hiltz? Oh, my apologies. It has been made and seconded. I don't see any other questions. I do see Director McMahon's hand still up, but apparently that's not intentional. So I will call the question, A, B, D, E, and F. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. All right, moving on. Is there anything from Annex F or G that anybody would like to bring up or discuss? Director Seegers?
Thank you. Just a quick one. Follow up to the Policing and Public Safety Committee. I have met with Sergeant Newman from the RCMP, and will be assisting him in the transition from the SCRD format around the committee to the RCMP, managing that. He's perfectly okay with doing that, just needs some guidance in getting that set up. So that is moving forward.
Thank you. Director McMahon, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have two items. The first was the policing committee. The fact that it was being dissolved was discussed at the last policing meeting, but perhaps we should write to everyone. I'm not sure that all of the members of the committee attended the last meeting, and write to them and say goodbye and thanks for all the fish. So that would also apply to TAC. So would we need a motion to write to the members of the transportation and policing committees, explaining the situation and thanking them for their participation over the years?
That sounds like a motion to me, Director McMahon, and I have a seconder for it. Any other questions or comments about that before I just call the question on it? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Next item, DL 1313. Basically, we've talked.
Sorry, have you jumped ahead of me? Yes.
I have, okay.
I'm still on F and G, just making sure there's no final things before we move on to the correspondence. Is there H? Isn't that H the next one? Yeah, so moving on to our communications, we have Annex H and I, and I suppose J, or although it's just a information line, I think, on the agenda. So go ahead, Director McMahon. I know you're eager to speak.
Oh, very. So we have discussed DL 1313 many times. There is a sheaf of staff reports on it over the years. And a number of times, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, BC Timber Sales has written to us saying that they are waiting for us to do something. And we weren't evidently clear about what we were supposed to do, but our MLA has kindly pointed out to us what we need to do, which is apply for a change of land use designation for that block. The two top options for us are a sponsored Crown grant for park or other purposes, or conditional withdrawal under the Land Act 17 for conservation purposes. I would like to suggest, not being in a position to determine which is the best of those two options, I would like to suggest that we refer this to staff and ask them to come back to us with a preferred option of those two options for the SCRD to apply for. And there are questions. And one of the questions that I have is a below market grant of the property. What does below market mean? I believe we were assured by BC Timber Sales that we would have to pay for the value of the timber, but I don't know that that's the case. And so I would be very interested in knowing, what is the precedent? What's the usual thing that's done?
Thank you, Director McMahon.
So I believe I was actually making a motion to refer this to staff to come back to us with a preferred option of those two options.
Director Seegers.
Could I suggest that we have staff come back with information and clarity around these two with the preferred option? So that we don't just, because, you know, when they come with that, we're going to want to know, like, why'd you pick this one over the other one?
Great clarification. Yeah, okay. Happy with that. Do I have a seconder for that? I'm inclined to agree. I think this is rural planning services, so it'll be A, B, D, E, and F. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. You know, aside from the fact that I don't get to vote on this again, I would request that staff confer with the town of Gibsons because Block 1313 does impact on the Gibsons aquifer.
Okay, I just want us to be careful that we don't pile a whole ton of work on staff right out of the gate on this one, but can that be, is that sufficient within the motion for staff to just touch base with Gibsons about it? It is, okay. Thank you. Director Seegers?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask staff if they're clear about what the intention of the motion is, or if we need more clarity for them.
GM Hall?
I'll check. My understanding of the intention is information about what these two processes would involve, criteria, a priority between the two, and the rationale for that, with some information from our neighbor and valued member municipality, the town of Gibsons included. Does that sound correct?
That sounds perfect.
Sounds about right,
Thanks.
yep.
Thank you.
Director Lee?
I assume that that would also include costs.
Yep.
Yes, thanks.
All right. I don't see any other hands up. I will call the question, A, B, D, E, and F. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Is there anything else within the communications that anybody wants to bring up or discuss? Or I haven't had a chance to look at the UBCM thing yet myself, but
Could Director McMahon speak to that? I believe she's looked at that document in depth.
Director McMahon?
Sure. I seem to be missing. Oh, right. Okay, it's just on there as an item. Yes, I did read through the report. I have drafted a letter to UBCM. My concern about the report is that it describes the problem, then it sets up some lovely principles for solving the problem, and then it provides a lot of recommendations, none of which, from my point of view, solves the problem, especially for rural areas. And it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. One of their recommendations is that the province set up a central sort of registry of Airbnb or, short-term rentals. There is a service that, scours the internet to find all of these and puts them in one place. And to do that provincially actually makes a lot of sense. But then what? Can we issue a bylaw ticket based on the existence of an advertisement on an online platform? No answer, because if we could indeed ticket on that basis, then it would considerably change the landscape for bylaw enforcement. But then the next question, of course, is how do we actually compel compliance? And that report, again, provides us with no tools, no assistance, no suggestions. And finally, the report recommends that a tool that we should use is to bring in business licenses in the rural areas. And I think that that is impractical and undesirable for a great many reasons. It would add more bureaucracy. It would very likely not pay for itself, and it would be extremely unpopular with the residents of rural areas. I'm doubtful we could get a business license service approved by the electorate. So I think that we should pursue this through AVICC and UBCM, specifically the question of how rural areas are supposed to deal with this. And I'm willing to volunteer our EA representatives on UBCM and the regional bodies as well to take a look at this. I haven't asked them if they want to volunteer, but what the heck. I think that's about it for me.
Okay. Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Seegers.
Thank you. Director McMahon, would you like to see a letter go to UBCM from the Sunshine Coast Regional District addressing the fact that the short-term rental accommodation document does not address the concerns of electoral areas?
Sure,
In
I'd be
regional
delighted.
district.
I will also write my own letter with extra lurid details. Thank you.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Director McMahon referenced the cost of the business licenses. One of the things we're looking at doing in Gibson's is incorporating into the cost of the business license for an STR, the cost of enforcement and the cost of monitoring. So if you were to hire one of the companies that does monitor short-term rental, those fee costs are into the bylaw, and also the bylaw or the business license would be scaled to the size of the STR operation.
Thank you, Director Kroll. I'm actually going to follow up with you separately because I'd had a similar thought about doing something like that in Seashelt at one point. So, Director Seegers.
Thank you. I'd like to make a recommendation that the Sunshine Coast Regional District write a letter in response to the regulation short-term accommodation document from UBCM to UBCM.
All right, and I do see a seconder for that. Any other comments? Director Lee, my apologies, I didn't see your hand.
That's because I just put it up the last second. I had read this, and I agree very much with Donna McMahon. The bylaws and the enforcements for the rural areas is missing. And I'm very interested in the concept of including unpaid fines on property taxes. So I'm hoping that aspect is brought forward while we discuss this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last comments before I call the question on it? No? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. We have no new business and we have no in-camera section, so I think I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all those in favor? And we're adjourned. Thank you very much. Do we have any Okay.
She emailed me. So.
Okay. IT. Sorry. IT has given you permission to unmute yourself. You do need to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? My name is Lynn Gardner. I actually attended regarding the 1220 Lockyer conversation. I was under the impression that during that discussion I'd be able to ask questions of staff and so on, but I was probably incorrect at that point. So, you know, I see that anyway. It's been moved to carry. Sorry, you're carrying on with the trailer park and so on for now. So I think I will reserve any of these questions for public hearing and so on. So, thank you.
Thank you. You are, of course, welcome to email in with questions for staff at any time. But yeah, do please keep involved in the process.
I will do. Thank you very much.
Planning@scrd.ca. Thank you. All right, then we will see everybody later.